Title: My fiancée didn't want me to meet her parents, said they wouldn't be at the wedding, so I secretly went anyway. If someone had told me a year ago that the happiest chapter of my life would begin with a secret that nearly destroyed everything I believed about love, I would have laughed. Looking back now, I realize that some truths don't arrive with loud warnings. They whisper through small excuses, delayed conversations, and unanswered questions until one day they become impossible to ignore. My name is Ethan, and I truly believed I had found the woman I would spend the rest of my life with. Emily was kind, intelligent, funny, and somehow managed to make even ordinary days feel unforgettable. We had been together for almost 3 years before I proposed, and when she said yes, I thought every dream I had ever carried was finally coming true. But only a few weeks after our engagement, something began to feel strangely out of place. Every time I asked about meeting her parents, she smiled nervously and changed the subject. At first, I assumed they simply lived far away or preferred their privacy. Then she told me something that made no sense at all. She said her parents wouldn't be attending our wedding because they didn't like large gatherings and preferred to stay away from family events. I accepted her explanation, but deep inside, I couldn't understand how loving parents could miss the biggest day of their daughter's life. The more I tried to ignore the feeling, the stronger it became. Every answer she gave created more questions. I loved Emily enough to trust her, yet something inside me warned that I was only seeing a small part of the truth. I had no idea that one quiet decision to search for answers on my own would uncover a secret that would change not only our future, but the lives of everyone connected to it. The weeks that followed should have been filled with nothing but excitement. We were choosing flowers, comparing wedding venues, arguing playfully over music, and laughing about how impossible it was to keep our guest list under control. From the outside, we looked like the perfect engaged couple, yet every joyful moment seemed to carry an invisible shadow that only I could feel. Whenever someone casually asked about Emily's parents, she would answer so quickly that the conversation never had a chance to continue. She always wore the same polite smile, but I began noticing how tightly she held my hand whenever the subject came up, almost as if she feared I might ask another question. One evening, while we were finalizing invitations, I counted the names carefully and noticed there wasn't a single invitation addressed to her family. I looked at her and asked as gently as I could, "Are you absolutely sure your parents don't want to come?" She didn't even look up from the table. She simply nodded and said they had already made up their minds years ago that they disliked weddings. The answer sounded rehearsed instead of natural. I tried to convince myself that every family was different, but my heart refused to believe it. A few days later, we attended a friend's engagement party. I watched Emily happily chatting with everyone else's parents, laughing and sharing stories as though she had known them for years. Then one of our friends jokingly asked when they would finally meet her mom and dad. For a brief second, the smile disappeared from her face. She excused herself and walked outside. I followed her a minute later and found her standing alone, staring into the parking lot with tears quietly rolling down her cheeks. She quickly wiped them away before turning around. She insisted she was just overwhelmed with wedding planning, but something about that explanation felt incomplete. That night, after dropping her home, I sat in my car for nearly an hour, replaying every conversation we'd ever had about her family. None of it fit together anymore. She had once mentioned growing up near a quiet lake, then months later claimed she had spent most of her childhood in the city. She had talked about celebrating holidays with cousins, yet later insisted she had almost no relatives. They were small contradictions, but together they formed a picture that no longer made sense. I wasn't looking for reasons to doubt the woman I loved, yet the doubts kept finding me. I finally decided that before promising forever to someone, I needed to understand the part of her life she kept hidden. I wasn't planning to spy on her or betray her trust. I simply wanted the truth, whatever it might be. I told myself that if her parents truly wanted nothing to do with the wedding, I would respect their wishes. But if something else was happening, I couldn't ignore it. Without telling Emily, I quietly began searching for any clue that might lead me to them, never imagining that the first piece of information I uncovered would leave me completely speechless. The first clue appeared in the most unexpected place. While organizing some of our wedding paperwork, I noticed an old emergency contact form Emily had accidentally mixed in with the documents. Most of the information was outdated, but one name caught my attention. It was listed under father, along with an address in a quiet town about 2 hours away. I stared at it for several minutes, wondering whether I should simply forget what I had seen. It felt wrong to go looking for answers behind her back, but it also felt impossible to marry someone while such a huge part of her life remained a mystery. After 2 sleepless nights, curiosity finally won. Early Saturday morning, I drove to the address, telling myself I would leave immediately if it didn't feel right. The neighborhood was peaceful, with tree-lined streets and modest homes that looked well cared for. The address led me to a small brick house with a white fence and colorful flowers blooming in the front yard. Nothing about it suggested a family that wanted to disappear from their daughter's life. I sat in my car for several minutes, debating whether to knock on the door. Before I could decide, the front door opened, and an older man stepped outside carrying a watering can. He looked around quietly before beginning to water the flowers, with the kind of care that only comes from years of routine. As I watched him, an older woman appeared behind him with 2 mugs of coffee. They smiled at each other in a way that reflected years of love and companionship. It was impossible to imagine these 2 people refusing to attend their only daughter's wedding without a heartbreaking reason. Taking a deep breath, I walked toward the gate. The man noticed me and offered a polite smile. "Can I help you?" he asked. My heart pounded as I introduced myself. The moment I said, "I'm engaged to Emily," the smiles on both of their faces disappeared. They looked at each other in complete silence, as though they had just seen a ghost. In that instant, I realized Emily hadn't been hiding her parents from me. She had been hiding me from them. For several long seconds, no one spoke. The older man tightened his grip on the watering can while the woman looked at me with a mixture of shock and sadness. I immediately apologized if I had come at the wrong time and explained that Emily had told me they wouldn't be attending our wedding. The man's expression changed completely. "Our wedding?" he repeated quietly, as if he couldn't believe the words. Then he looked at his wife, who covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. "She told you we weren't coming?" she whispered. I nodded, confused by their reaction. The man invited me inside, saying there was something I deserved to know. My heart raced as I followed them into the house, where framed family photographs covered the walls. Many of them showed a younger Emily smiling beside her parents on birthdays, vacations, and school graduations. It was obvious they had once been a close family. After a few moments of silence, the man finally spoke. "We never said we wouldn't come to her wedding," he said softly. "The truth is, we didn't even know she was getting married." His words hit me like a wave. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Emily had never mentioned our engagement to them at all. Her mother reached for a small photo album and gently placed it in front of me. Inside were pictures of Emily growing up, along with handwritten notes she had made as a little girl about how she dreamed of introducing the man she loved to her parents one day. Tears filled her mother's eyes as she turned the pages. "We don't know why she cut us out of her life," she said. "We've tried to call, write letters, and even visit, but she always pushed us away." I sat there speechless, realizing that the story I had believed for months was beginning to fall apart, and I knew I couldn't leave that house without finding out why. I listened in silence as Emily's parents shared their side of the story. They never spoke with anger or resentment. Instead, every word carried disappointment and hope that one day their daughter would return. Her father explained that about 4 years earlier, Emily had suddenly become distant after moving to another city for work. At first, they thought she was simply busy building her career, but the phone calls became shorter, the visits stopped completely, and eventually she blocked almost every attempt they made to reach her. They couldn't understand what had changed because there had been no major argument, no family dispute, and no dramatic event that could explain such a painful separation. Her mother quietly admitted that she still baked Emily's favorite birthday cake every year, hoping she might unexpectedly walk through the front door. She smiled as she said it, but the tears in her eyes revealed how much that hope had hurt over the years. As I looked around the living room, I noticed recent photographs of Emily displayed proudly on a shelf. They had clearly followed her life from a distance, through social media and mutual friends, celebrating every achievement without being part of it. That realization broke my heart. Before I left, her father handed me a small envelope. "We're not asking you to choose between us and our daughter," he said gently. "But if you truly love Emily, ask her why she disappeared. We've been waiting years for that answer." I accepted the envelope without opening it. As I drove home, my thoughts raced faster than the traffic around me. The woman I loved had hidden an entire chapter of her life, and now I had to decide whether to confront her immediately or first discover what was inside the envelope that rested silently on the passenger seat beside me. I listened in silence as Emily's parents shared their side of the story. They never spoke with anger or resentment. Instead, every word carried disappointment and hope that one day their daughter would return. Her father explained that about 4 years earlier, Emily had suddenly become distant after moving to another city for work. At first, they thought she was simply busy building her career, but the phone calls became shorter, the visits stopped completely, and eventually she blocked almost every attempt they made to reach her. They couldn't understand what had changed because there had been no major argument, no family dispute, and no dramatic event that could explain such a painful separation. Her mother quietly admitted that she still baked Emily's favorite birthday cake every year, hoping she might unexpectedly walk through the front door. She smiled as she said it, but the tears in her eyes revealed how much that hope had hurt over the years. As I looked around the living room, I noticed recent photographs of Emily displayed proudly on a shelf. They had clearly followed her life from a distance, through social media and mutual friends, celebrating every achievement without being part of it. That realization broke my heart. Before I left, her father handed me a small envelope. "We're not asking you to choose between us and our daughter," he said gently. "But if you truly love Emily, ask her why she disappeared. We've been waiting years for that answer." I accepted the envelope without opening it. As I drove home, my thoughts raced faster than the traffic around me. The woman I loved had hidden an entire chapter of her life, and now I had to decide whether to confront her immediately or first discover what was inside the envelope that rested silently on the passenger seat beside me. Emily lowered her head and remained silent for what felt like forever. When she finally looked at me, her eyes were filled with fear rather than anger. She quietly admitted that she had lied about her parents not wanting to attend the wedding. I asked her why, and she struggled to find the right words. After taking a deep breath, she said that years ago she had convinced herself that leaving her family behind was the only way to move forward. A misunderstanding had grown into distance, and that distance had eventually turned into silence. Instead of fixing the relationship, she kept pretending everything was fine until she no longer knew how to face them again. She was ashamed that so much time had passed. Then I told her I had met her parents. Tears immediately rolled down her cheeks. She didn't ask what they had said or whether they were angry. She only whispered, "Do they hate me?" I shook my head and handed her the unopened letter her father had asked me to give her. With trembling hands, she unfolded it and began reading. Before she reached the final page, she broke down in tears. She told me no one had ever shown me that letter because she had ignored every attempt they made to contact her. Looking at me through her tears, she said, "I don't know if they'll ever forgive me, but I don't want to spend the rest of my life running away anymore." At that moment, I realized our wedding was no longer the biggest challenge before us. Rebuilding a broken family had become far more important. The following morning, Emily called her parents' number several times, but each time she lost the courage and ended the call before it connected. I stayed beside her without saying a word, knowing this was a step she had to take on her own. After nearly an hour, she finally pressed the call button and let it ring. Her mother answered almost immediately. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Emily whispered, "Mom, it's me." On the other end of the phone, I could hear quiet sobbing before her mother managed to say, "We've been waiting to hear your voice." Emily could no longer hold back her tears. She apologized again and again, admitting that she had let fear and guilt keep her away for far too long. Her mother didn't interrupt her. She simply listened. When the call ended, Emily looked at me with a mixture of relief and nervousness. Her parents had invited us to visit that weekend. During the drive there, she held my hand tightly, worried they might not accept her after everything that had happened. But the moment the front door opened, her parents embraced her without hesitation. There were tears, apologies, and long moments of silence that said more than words ever could. Watching them together, I realized that forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it can open the door to a better future. As we sat down together for dinner that evening, I had a feeling the hardest conversation was finally behind us. But another unexpected surprise was about to change our wedding plans forever. Dinner that evening felt unlike anything I had experienced before. The conversation was cautious at first, but as the hours passed, the laughter slowly returned. Emily's parents shared stories from her childhood that I had never heard, and for the first time since our engagement, I saw her completely at peace. It was as though a weight she had carried for years had finally been lifted. Just when we were preparing to leave, her father excused himself and returned with a small wooden box. He placed it on the table and gently slid it toward Emily. Inside were photographs, childhood drawings, birthday cards, and a delicate family heirloom that had been passed down through generations. Her mother smiled through tears and said they had saved it for the day Emily got married, believing that someday she would come back. Emily could barely speak. She hugged both of her parents and promised that from now on, they would always be part of her life. Then she turned to me with tears in her eyes and admitted that if I hadn't searched for the truth, she might have spent the rest of her life hiding from the people who loved her most. Before we left, her father looked at us and quietly asked one question that made us both smile. "Is there still time for us to come to the wedding?" I looked at Emily, and without hesitation she nodded. "There wouldn't be a wedding without you," she replied. At that moment, I realized that what had started as a painful secret had become the beginning of a family finding its way back together, and our wedding day was about to become far more meaningful than either of us had ever imagined. As the wedding day drew closer, everything felt different. The planning that had once been stressful was now filled with excitement, because Emily's parents were involved in every important decision. Her mother happily helped choose the final details for the ceremony, while her father insisted on taking care of a few things himself, saying he had dreamed of seeing his daughter get married for years. Watching them together, it was hard to believe they had once gone years without speaking. Their conversations were no longer filled with regret, but with hope for the future. Even our friends noticed the change in Emily. She smiled more, laughed more, and no longer carried the sadness that had quietly followed her for so long. A few days before the wedding, Emily thanked me for refusing to accept the easy answers she had given me. She admitted that she had been terrified of facing her parents because she believed they would never forgive her. Instead, she discovered that love had been waiting for her all along. That night, as we looked over the final wedding schedule, I realized this journey had never been about uncovering a secret. It had been about giving a broken family the chance to heal. With everything finally in place, only one day remained until the ceremony, and I knew that when those doors opened, the people standing beside us would represent not just our future together, but the family we had fought so hard to reunite. The morning of our wedding arrived with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. As I stood waiting for the ceremony to begin, I couldn't help thinking about how close we had come to starting our marriage, with unanswered questions and hidden pain. Looking around, I saw Emily's parents greeting guests with warm smiles, and it felt as though they had always been part of this day. When the music began and Emily walked down the aisle beside her father, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. I could see the pride on his face and the happiness in hers. It was a moment neither of them thought they would ever experience together again. After the ceremony, during the reception, Emily's father stood to give a short toast. He spoke about forgiveness, second chances, and how families are never perfect, but love gives people the courage to find their way back to one another. His words touched everyone in the room, especially Emily, who hugged both of her parents with tears of gratitude. Later that evening, as we shared our first dance, Emily quietly thanked me for believing there was more to her story instead of walking away. When things became confusing, I smiled and reminded her that marriage isn't about finding someone with a perfect past. It's about choosing to face the future together. As the celebration continued, I realized the greatest gift we had received that day wasn't the wedding itself. It was the chance to begin our new life, surrounded by a family that had finally become whole again, setting the stage for a future built on honesty, trust, and unconditional love. As the celebration came to an end, and the last of our guests began saying their goodbyes, I found myself standing outside the venue, looking at the people who meant the most to us. Just a few months earlier, I believed I was marrying the woman of my dreams, but I never imagined that our journey would also heal a family that had been broken for years. Emily walked over, slipped her hand into mine, and smiled with a sense of peace I had never seen before. She quietly admitted that she had spent so long running from her past that she almost lost the chance to enjoy her future. Facing the truth had been frightening, but it had also given her something she thought was gone forever: her family. Before we left, Emily's parents embraced both of us and promised that no matter what life brought, we would never have to face it alone. In that moment, I realized that families are not held together because they never make mistakes. They stay together because they are willing to forgive, listen, and choose each other again, even after years of silence. On our drive home, Emily looked out the window for a moment before turning to me and saying, "Thank you for not giving up on me when it would have been easier to walk away." I smiled and told her that love is not about pretending everything is perfect. It's about having the courage to search for the truth, even when it feels uncomfortable, and then standing beside the person you love as they face it. Looking back now, I understand that the secret I thought would destroy our future became the very reason our marriage started with honesty instead of fear. I secretly went looking for answers because I wanted to protect our relationship. But what I found was something far greater than I ever expected. I found a parents who never stopped loving their daughter, a woman brave enough to confront her deepest regrets, and a family that discovered it is never too late to come back together. That experience changed me forever, and every time I look at our wedding photograph, I don't just remember the day we were married. I remember the day forgiveness reunited a family and gave us the strongest possible foundation for the life we would build together. If you like over video, please response us by comment. Okay, goodbye, maybe live happy, maybe live long. Mystery Tales.